Hi guys, it's Maigan Lynn here from MaiganLynnArt.com, and today we're just going through our third tutorial in our three-part series. The first part was showing you how to mix the glue all or the Mod Podge water pouring medium mix. The second part was showing you how I specifically mix my paint mixes. Again, the way I do things is not to a science. It's not exact. You don't have to do it this way. You can, search the millions and millions of videos on YouTube to find out how to do this. I've just had so many questions about my specific process that I thought, instead of constantly always just answering them on the message boards, which I will still do if it comes up, but it's easier to direct everybody to something that they can see and that I can verbally explain. So this is the third part. This tutorial will be showing you how I do my galaxy style poured paintings. This is just going to be the flip cup style poured paintings. I guess it's pretty generic at this point, considering all the different techniques there are out there. But this is still one of the most solid, my favorite go-to methods. I love the cells. I love all the different tiny cells, the large cells, the different variations. So I'm just going to show you how I go about this. So I've pre-mixed all of my paints, as you can see in the previous video. All of my paints have silicone already in them. There's 2 to 3 drops of silicone per paint mix. Each paint mix consists of 2/3 paint to 1/3 of the pouring medium mix, and then 2 to 3 drops of silicone per paint. The only colors that don't have the silicone are the black and the white. These are generally the base colors. These are my most preferred base colors. They also tend to be heavier paints, so they're the ones that you layer in the cup first. The reason being is that because they are heavier, you start at the bottom with either your black or your white. In the case of a galaxy pour, you start with black. So you put the black in the bottom. You don't have to use black and white as a base. You can also use any other color, really. Most preferred would be a heavier paint, which is why some people end up measuring on a scale the weight of their paints. Or there are some companies that actually tell you the weight of their paints, because some acrylic paints just naturally come heavier than others. It's just the way they're made. So the heavier paints are going to fall through once you flip it upside down. So say we have black on the bottom. Once you flip it upside down, all the other colors that you've layered on top of it, it's inverted now. So the black's going to fall through all of these other colors. The black, because it doesn't have silicone, and it's still a water-based paint, it's going to react with all of the other paints on the way down, causing cells. It's going to hit the silicone, and the water in the base paint is going to react with the silicone, creating cells. I don't have an exact science for this. Some people do. I just basically go by feel. You'll notice that I do that with a lot of things. I just kind of feel it out, sort it out, which is why I try and tell you that this, my method is only my method. It's not perfect. It's not maybe necessarily for everybody, but it is the way that I do it. I do get a lot of questions about it, so I figured I would give it a shot and show you guys. So the colors that we're working with, if you didn't catch the last tutorial, which I do recommend if you're just learning, to go back and watch the pouring medium mix as well as the paint mix tutorials. For my galaxy pours, most often I definitely use black to represent sky. I do use a little bit of white. It's nice when it pops up and gives you kind of like a star kind of feeling to it. It also helps to separate or lighten the black a little bit from the other paints. Sometimes, depending on the color of paint, mixing with black can make it muddy. Depending on your consistency of your paint, depending on the brand of paint that you're using. I know specifically yellows are really, really hard to work with. I've come across only one yellow so far that I haven't had as much mud issues with it. I think there was another artist on YouTube, I'll have to look it up, but I think it's a Liquitex, the Liquitex Basics Yellow. I think that one as well works really well. So for my Galaxy pours, most often you'll see me using the hot pink. This is the Acrylic Loft Easy Flow, or Flow Acrylic, or sorry, Artist Loft Flow Acrylic paint in the hot pink. One of my favorite colors. I find it just reacts and contrasts really well with a lot of the other colors. So there's that one. I'll also generally use a purple or two. In this case, I have two different color purples. I have, in the tutorial, this is one of the purples that I came across at one of my local Dollar Tree type stores. I will use any kind of acrylic that I can get my hands on, and I will try and make it work to the best of my ability. Usually that's not a problem. I find that dollar store type paints sometimes tend to be a little bit thinner. Some people will say they don't hold as much pigment. This one holds a crazy amount of pigment for whatever reason. It is a little bit thinner, so you do have to work with it, but it is my favorite purple, and that's this one right here. So this one here is the Prism Violet by Liquitex Basics. So I don't stick to one brand in particular. I hop around. The hot pink, I'll show you. This is the Artist Loft Flow Acrylic. You can find these at Michael's. I love the size of these bottles because they last forever. So I'm going to move these just because I don't want them to fall off the canvas. This one here, you'll notice in a lot of my paintings, I've said it before, I use a lot of aqua type colors. Aqua is my most favorite color in the whole world. So that's this one here. This is the Liquitex Basics again. These are thicker paints, so you really have to work with them. The 2/3 to 1/3 paint to pouring medium mix doesn't necessarily work. You're probably going to find yourself having to use a little bit more pouring medium and then possibly some water on top of that as well. They're just a thicker paint. You want them to be able to flow. I keep my paints on the thicker side so they don't just disintegrate by the time you see them again in the morning. I like my paints thicker so they stay put. Like when I'm done moving them, that's essentially where they're going to be come next morning as well. There are some differences that some of the paints will sink a little bit more, some of the cells will shift a little bit, but not much. And this one, this is the last color in my Galaxy pour. It's upside down because I'm trying to get as much out of this bottle as I can. This is by Folk Art. These are the color shift paints, and these are amazing. You can't really tell in the cup right now, but once it dries especially, or even just to look at it inside the bottle, I'll show you. It shifts from a really pretty aqua shimmer to like a blue, electric blue almost in the light depending, and it'll do the same thing on your painting when it dries. These are amazing. They are expensive though. I do not recommend, if you're doing large quantities of paintings, that you do buy small bottles like this. I buy small bottles like this when I find a color that I really like and I can't find it in a larger quantity. But they are expensive. I will use this whole bottle in one sitting. I generally mix quite a bit of paint to start, because when I sit down to do paint, I don't like to waste my paint, so I want to make sure that I have enough to do multiple paintings. I usually end up doing anywhere between 4 and 6 when I sit down to actually do some pours. So first of all, I'm not wasting time. I'm a stay-at-home mom to a 4-year-old. I am also a military spouse. I run all of the errands currently because my husband's very busy with his pilot training. And my 4-year-old is also very busy, and I'm trying to balance my art career. So I don't have time to waste. So I try and be efficient as possible, do multiple things, do the process all at the same time. And I just find that's most effective for me. So, okay, we're gonna start with the actual pouring now. Make sure your supplies are free of debris so you don't end up with chunks. Okay, so I will show you the mix quickly. So these have sat a little bit. I'm gonna have to add some more water. And the only paints that don't have silicone in them are the black and the white. You want the silicone to be able to react with these paints as they go down through the other colors. Okay, and again, like I said, I keep my paint on the thicker side. So we're going to start with black as a base. Just fill up a little bit, and that should be about enough to start. Just a little bit. If you add too much black, you risk the chance of only seeing black. It'll take over a lot of your other colors. So usually what I do, I know a lot of people go by weight, but there's also the color issue. I don't want to put anything too light next to black and risk the chance of making mud. So generally what I will do is I will start off with a nice deep purple on top of the black, a good layer of it, and I just swirl mine around. Now in some people's cups you'll notice when they're mixing, their paints immediately start to react with each other. Mine, because they're a little bit thicker, they don't react as quickly. But you will see that you'll notice on the bottom. Okay, so we did purple, and we'll do a little bit of aqua, I think. So do a swirl. And I like to lift my cups when I'm pouring them in. I lift them up so they drop further into the paint. Okay, now we'll do the hot pink. Quite a bit of the hot pink. You can see a little bit of the reactions in there now. I don't know if you can, no, I'm not going to tilt that because that's going to, you'll see. Okay, and now we're going to add a different color of purple. Oh, this one definitely needs some more water. This one's barely moving at all. No, that's not bad. It just needed a bit of a mix. Okay, and I might add another drop or so of silicone into this one, only because I've now mixed what silicone was in there right into the paint, essentially making it a part of the paint. All you need per cup is about two to three drops. Once the silicone is in there, you just give it a bit of a mix to kind of whoosh it around, but don't overdo it. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, and now I'm going to add a little bit of white before the metallic. Give this a good spin. If you get paint on your canvas like this, I usually just kind of, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to see it once everything's poured on top anyways. A little bit of white. A little bit of white, because if you add too much white, then you end up with pastel colors instead of the really nice and vibrant colors. Okay, so this is my Aqua Flash mix. This is the metallic color shift one. Okay. And then a touch more black, which you don't need a ton of, like that's enough. And maybe a bit more purple and a bit more pink. Slight bit more pink. You'll also notice that underneath, I don't know if you can see it, but underneath my canvas, I've also laid down some wax paper. I do that. I have it's a tarp on my studio floor. I prefer to work on my floor because my workspace is for what I need and what I need around me. I prefer working on the floor where I can kind of spread out. But underneath, I put some wax paper on top of that. So when the paint flows over, the wax paper will catch the drippings. And once it's dry, I can actually peel those skins right off. I'm saving mine hopefully to eventually make jewelry out of the skins, because sometimes it's sad. The skins actually make prettier pours than the actual pour itself. Just kind of, I guess, Murphy's Law, whatever can happen will happen. kind of thing. So anyways, this is what it looks like now that all the paints are in there. It just looks like a gloopy, globby mess. So what I do is then I flip my canvas over on top of it, make sure it's about centered. You can see the ring of the cup. I don't know if you guys can see that there. You can see the ring of the cup, so you generally know about where it is. Put your hand on the back, give it a good flip, and then sit it back down. Make sure there's no fluffs or anything that you don't want on your canvas. And now you just give it a couple seconds. You can tap it if you want to. I usually sit here and give it a drum beat. Make sure all the paints come down. And now here's the fun part. In my videos, this is one of my favorite parts. I have somebody I work with, his name is Christian, and he edits the videos for me. He'll be editing this one as well. And he times it perfectly so the music ramps up just as I'm about to lift the cup. It's always my favorite part, because that's the most magical, when you finally lift the cup and you get to see what exactly you've done. So here we go. Look at that. And right away, like, you can see, I've said before, I don't let my paint sit. I leave the air bubbles as part of the painting. I really enjoy the bubbles. I think it adds a lot of texture. You can see the color shift. Even though it was one of the last paintings, because it's so heavy, it came right through. And I'd like to get as much of the paint from the cup as I possibly can. So I usually use my stir sticks and just kind of scoop, not too much, because again, you don't want to mix, you don't want just mud. Most of the stuff is going to end up disappearing, but it does help the paint to flow onto the canvas. Now, one of my favorite things to do, when I first started doing this, one of the things I was most excited about was using my torch. This is an Or Blue culinary torch. You can buy them on Amazon. I think you can also get these at Home Depot. They're not expensive, and they're really easy to use. So this torch is really nice because it has the continuous flow option. There's the off switch, and then once you have it on, this is the igniter. Once you have it on, you could just click it to the continuous, and then you don't have to hold your hand on the button anymore. It just flows by itself. So I prefer to torch twice. There's a continuous. And see, these guys, the air bubbles there will just pop. So I torch my painting once just after I pour, once it's moved on its own a little bit, see what kind of cells we can bring up. And the reason I do this is because I like, I've said it before, I like a variation of cell sizes, and I find when I do it this way, see all the different cells it's already bringing up? When I go to move the painting, the cells will stretch right out. And then the second time I go to torch, it'll help bring up any residual air bubbles underneath, any little cells, just to give it a little bit more interest. So I run this over the whole thing. You don't want to do too much in one spot. If you make it too hot, you run the risk of burning your paints, which I've done, and I don't mind the texture, but it's not necessarily something that's recommended. So I'm going to put on gloves for this part because it does get really, really messy, just to save my hands a little bit, because makes it hard to turn off your equipment when you've got hands full of paints, even if you have a cloth to kind of wipe them off. Okay, so these, I have a whole box of these. I prefer to use stuff that's reusable. You can reuse these if you go and wash them off immediately, let them dry. You could also just toss them. I try and reduce the amount of stuff that I have to toss initially in the first place. So now it just, you pick up your canvas and you start What I normally do is I find the corner or the parts of the painting that are my favorite, and I try and salvage them, which is not easy. See that corner right there with all the greens and purples? I love that. Now it's gonna run right over the edge. We want to keep some of the pink still, so I don't want to run that right over. And that's the part that's difficult. I run into a lot of people that try and say that, you know, acrylic poured painting isn't necessarily art because you're just kind of sloshing paint on a canvas. If you go through the tutorials that I just posted, including this one, you'll see that's not necessarily the case. Look at those. Because there are still a lot of decisions, a lot of trial and error, a lot of knowing how the paints are going to react, knowing where to start in order to salvage your favorite parts, and how to move it to make an interesting composition. Because not everybody necessarily has that ability. I've been doing art for the last 13 years. Selling professionally, and I've learned quite a few things. I'm mostly self-taught, but there is a learning curve. So what I'm doing here is you'll find the corners, because when you pour, it's generally a circular shape. The corners are a little bit tricky, so what I will do, because I like the edges of my canvases to be completely covered with the paint, I will go around and just kind of touch up any corners, kind of fill in and move the paints a little bit. So yes, as I was saying, this is definitely art. There's a lot to it. It's not just sloshing paint on a canvas and saying, voila, here you go. There are elements of unknown aspects to this. There are so many colors in this. This is so cool. I don't know if you guys can see that. All the different flecks of the aqua. So yeah, you just move it until you're happy with it. I don't know what's going on this bottom edge here. We're gonna pull some paints into it a little bit. Okay, and I always wear an artist smock, and I generally tend to kind of smear my hands all over it, because why have an artist smock if you're not going to make a mess of it? Okay, so now I try and wipe some of the paint off of my gloves. I usually have a cloth sitting by as I'm doing this, so I can still protect my hands. And you know, I say this, but I end up with paint halfway up my arms and somehow on my neck and ears and my nose. It's not a clean process. Okay, so now is the point where I torch again. Oh, she's being finicky. There we go. Okay, and you'll see some of the air bubbles starting to pop. And those air bubbles, when they pop, they tend to show some of the colors underneath, which in a galaxy pour I find makes it look kind of like stars. These are fun. The galaxy pours are definitely my favorite. I like the different space type aspects, but also, I don't know, it feels like the combination of like ocean and space, sea foam and Saturn's rings kind of thing. So there's quite a few air bubbles in there because I do not let my paint sit overnight. Some artists do. Some artists will let it sit so the air bubbles will naturally come to the top. I don't. I like the different textures. I like, you know, sometimes burning my paint. And I like the different textures of the air bubbles and helping the silicone react in different ways. There's so many bubbles in there every time I go over. There's new ones coming out. This has to be my favorite part. I love the reaction of this. Just seeing once the bubbles pop. seeing them come up and all of a sudden morph into something new entirely. So I torch probably way more than most other artists out there torch. If you're not comfortable, if you don't want it to be busy, if you don't want anything crazy, don't do this. Again, I've said it 1,000 times, but this is just my method. It is one of the many methods. Other artists will probably look at this and think you're crazy, or that's not how you do it. There is no exact way to do this. Do whatever you feel is right for you. Do whatever you think speaks to you the most. Do whatever makes you happy, most importantly. Like the colors, I choose these colors because they make me happy. These aren't for everybody. It's the same, you know, I try in my other videos, I try and choose music that kind of goes with the feel of this. Bright, happy, fun, energetic. And it's not for everybody. The style isn't for everybody. The mess isn't for everybody. The way I leave my paints thick isn't necessarily for everybody, but this gives you a decent base. I mean, even if you wanted to use these methods, go off of that and try and, you know, work out your own. Everybody's painting is going to be different, and that's one of the things that I love most about all of this. You could have the same method for everybody, and every single painting that you do with that method, regardless of whether you use the same colors, they're all going to turn out different. There is no exact replica. That's just, it's not going to happen. You can control some things to kind of help with a certain look, but getting two paintings that are going to be the exact same, that's not likely. So it's a fun thing to do. It's a fun thing to try. For me, when I first started doing the pours, I said in the first video, it was because I really needed something to jumpstart me back into my art. I had taken quite a bit of a break between the birth of my son and my husband's pilot training. My family just required a lot of me, so I put my art on the back burner. I'm an illustrative artist, watercolor illustrative artist by trade. I kind of put it aside for a little bit, so I found the beginning of this year, 2017, I wanted to get back into it, but I felt I needed something to kind of catapult me, give me a jolt, essentially, back into the world of art, and I really just needed to be creative. I needed to play with color. I needed to play with different reactions. I just needed something that made me surprised at the outcomes. And this was it. I had seen people doing the poured painting that I thought, these are incredible. If I could get something that made cells like that, which was the first draw, was the cells. If I could do that, I could find out how to do other things with it, or I've found even with my illustrative work that this, using the colors, playing with the colors, being just free, has helped me immensely in even my illustrative work. It's just, the creative train that it has set off has been pretty amazing. So yeah, so this is the third part tutorial. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you have any questions, if there's something that I didn't cover, if there's something that I forgot to mention, which is most likely, knowing me, feel free to leave me a comment in the comment section. I said it in the other two tutorials as well, but I try and get to everybody's comment. I try and leave a reply. I appreciate all the interaction, all the subscriptions, anything you guys throw at me in the way of kindness is generally regarded as amazing and very much appreciated. So if you want to leave me a comment, if you have a question, you just want to leave comments and say it's awesome or not my style, if that's necessary. If you feel that's what you want to be saying, that's fine. I will accept it. But yeah, I will get back to you. So if you have any other questions, I did this in a 3-part section so it wasn't so overwhelming. The first part, again, is the pouring medium mix. If you want to learn how to mix the glue pouring medium, go to my first tutorial. The second tutorial is how to mix your paints in my style with using the glue tutorial or glue pouring medium. And then the third one, of course, is this one. This is the final in the series. If you have any other suggestions on things that you want to see or learn from me, again, you can leave those in the comment sections. I'm more than willing to hear your suggestions and see what I can do as far as that goes. So anyways, again, go back, check out some of the other videos, subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I want to thank you very much for watching.